Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Sensor Plane Photography Podcast, where light and technology come together. I'm your host, Jason Odell, and today is not a good day if you are a Nikon shooter because we're going to talk a little bit about Nikon acquisition syndrome, or the dreaded NAS. And what I mean by that is that I just received a gold box, the Nikon D810. Now, the D810 is a replacement and fuses really the D800 and the D800E. It's a replacement for both of those cameras, and it was just announced a couple of months ago. And you're probably wondering why I haven't mentioned anything about it up until this point. Well, good reason. What I want to talk about today are some of the differences between the D810 and its predecessor. I had the D800E, and I've got mine here. Let me put this box out of the way here. But I want to talk about a little bit about, upgrading cameras in general, whether it's a good idea, if it's something that you should do, because a lot of people wring their hands over the latest and greatest things. Do I really need this? And as a professional photographer, I should point out that I, number one, buy my own gear, so I've got to use my own hard-earned dollars to get these cameras. I don't get anything from any manufacturers. And number two, I need to have cameras that are the right tool for particular applications. Now, I like to do three kinds of photography. I like to do landscapes, wildlife, especially birds, and I like to do urban kind of travel photography. And each of those different types of photography, you could make the case for needing different features in a camera. For example, most of you who watch this podcast know that I got a Fuji X-T1 earlier in the year, and I love that camera. It's a fantastic camera. It's perfect for small size and traveling. But at the same time, it doesn't have all of the features that I can get on my larger DSLR cameras. The D800 is probably one of the best sensors ever produced. It's a 36 megapixel sensor. And we'll talk more about it with the D810 because it's a brand new version of that sensor, entirely new. If you want to make 36 megapixel landscapes or any other image for that matter and get incredibly rich dynamic range, well then that's a better choice than a 16 megapixel camera. At the same time, I also shoot a Nikon D4, which is a fantastic camera. It also costs a huge amount of money. The D4S, which was replaced with earlier in the year, I think sells for over $6,000. So that's not a camera for everybody. But what it does, besides being just ergonomically awesome and weather sealed and all those things, is that it shoots really fast and it shoots great with low light. So it's my go-to choice when I'm taking bird pictures. And so when I go down to Texas in May for my annual birding trip, the D4 and before that the D3S that was the camera that I would grab. So why would I want to get a D810 when I already have a D800E? And here's my D800E, and this is the 85 millimeter 1.4 lens, and here is the D810. So they're basically the same camera in terms of size. The ergonomics in the 810 have been refined a little bit. The grip's a little deeper, a little easier to use. The button placement's a little different. I'll go into more of those in a moment. But why would I want to upgrade from this excellent D800E, which is a fantastic camera, to a D810, which on paper doesn't look like there's all that much different? Well, again, it's personal need. As a professional photographer, I have to choose the right kind of tools. And I've been thinking about this for a long time. I did not pre-order the D810 when it was announced. I'm an NPS member. Nikon sent me an email, said, hey, you can pre-order this. I wasn't ready to do that at the time. Since then, I've thought more about it. I've thought about how I might fit a camera like this into my personal photographic needs. And that is the reason why I made the upgrade. So let me tell you about some of the things that are different in the D810 over the D800. I mentioned before, they're both 36 megapixel cameras. So resolution, detail, second to none. The only way you can get more detail out of one of these guys is by moving up to something like a medium format camera. Quite honestly, this is one of the D800 and now the D810 best best sensors on the planet, and I say that from empirical, just using the cameras. It delivers a file unlike anything I have ever seen. The colors, the tones, the dynamic range is amazing from this camera. And then if you go out to things like DxO, they'll tell you some numbers and say how awesome that is too. But I prefer just to look at real world results. And from my results, the D800E, I was picking this camera up more often than not over my D4 in everyday shooting situations. The image quality is just that good, especially when you use it with a really good lens. So what are the things in the 810 that got improved? Well, the sensor is a new design. So it's even got, potentially richer colors. Now, what about resolution? Well, they're both the same, 36 megapixel. Detail, though, you might get a teeny tiny bit of detail more out of a D810 than you would of a D800, and possibly a little more than a D800E. And here's the reason. When Nikon came out with the D800, they talked about the D800 and the D800E, and people were saying, well, what's the difference between these two cameras other than about $300 in price? And the biggest difference was that they advertised the D800E as not having an anti-aliasing or optical low-pass filter. And as a result, out of the camera, pictures were a little bit sharper, had a little bit more detail than if you shot a D800. The reality of that no anti-aliasing filter, however, was more about electronic and digital processing trickery than not having the physical filter in front of the sensor itself. It turns out that the D800E achieved this extra layer of detail through the X-Speed processor, the way the images were processed, the effect of the anti-aliasing filter, you try saying that fast a bunch of times, would get removed. It got canceled out in the processing pipeline. So it was saved right in there, you couldn't turn this on or off, that's just how it was and produced on your raw files. The D810, by comparison, really doesn't have an anti-aliasing filter. And I think, at least my opinion, is that, when the D800E was announced, there was concerns from people who might be shooting products or things with fabrics about maybe getting moire. And since then, since this camera came out, Nikon has released other cameras that don't use the anti-aliasing filter, the low-pass filter, or use that same trick. Cameras like the D7100, they don't have that. So since then, people have discovered that those fear of moire artifacts really aren't that strongly founded. I mean, they can happen. They can happen with any camera. And in most cases, especially if you shoot RAW, they're easily removed. So moire was never a problem with this camera. I only saw it in less than 1% of images that I captured. So I think Nikon is saying, all right, we're going to go full in with a camera that has no true optical low pass or anti-aliasing filter. So that's a big difference. Other little things that I was looking at, they have refined the autofocus. Same autofocus module, 51 points, but this camera, this 810, now shares much of the same autofocus DNA as the D4S has. There's group autofocus mode in addition to the dynamic autofocus modes, which should improve things. And the other thing, and this is something that I've noticed because I went out this morning and tested this, is that the autofocus acquisition with the D810 is just a little bit snappier than it is with the 800 or the 800E. And this is something that I noticed in the field. I was using my D800E as a backup to my D4 sitting in a blind in Texas using a big 600 millimeter lens. And what I noticed was clear off the bat that focus just didn't acquire quite as quickly. And in the field, if you're doing wildlife, that could mean the difference between getting a shot or not getting a shot. So the 810 should do a little better in that regard. I've noticed it. It just seems, at least in my casual observations, to acquire focus a little bit better. It locks in a little bit better. So that's important for me, again, because I go and do wildlife shooting, and I need to have a backup camera to my D4. So what other things are important here? That autofocus I mentioned, and then it's a little bit lighter. Okay, 20 grams, so that's only 2% lighter, but any little bit helps when you're carrying this camera, traveling with it. But another thing about the 810 that was intriguing to me was, again, if I'm thinking about using this as a backup or even a wildlife camera, I need to have a reasonably fast frame rate. And this is really true with sports and with birds. The difference between 5, 6, 7, and 10 frames per second is tremendous when you're talking about how many frames you can capture in a burst and what happens in between. Imagine a bird flapping its wings. So you hit the button and you're taking your picture of this bird and you're shooting at 3 frames per second. Well, at 3 frames per second, you're only going to see 1 or 2 wing beats in there. You're going to capture the wings. Maybe they're up, maybe they're down, maybe they're in front of the bird's face. It's hard to say. If you can shoot at 5 or 7 or 10 frames a second, the probability that one of those frames is going to have the right look, the right pose from that bird, that flying animal, or whatever it might be, or the soccer player going to head the ball, that you capture that moment of peak action, that is increased with the faster frame rates. Now, my backup camera and other wildlife camera had been a D300S, and there has been no true replacement to that camera since it came out. And the D300S, if you added a battery grip, would shoot 8 frames per second, which from just about everything is absolutely fast enough. Now, the D800 and the D800E shoot at 4 frames per second, which is not something that you would do for action. You could increase that to 6 frames per second, which is reasonable if you shot in DX crop mode and you used this battery grip. This is the MBD12, Nikon MBD12 battery grip. It just goes on the bottom. And you had to use either AA batteries, or you could use the big battery that comes for the D4, which is the ENEL18 battery. You can get these, pop it in there, and then you get a faster camera when used in one of the crop modes. Otherwise, it was still a 4 frame per second camera if you're shooting full frame. If we put this grip, and by the way, it uses the same grip. If we put this grip onto the D810, we go from 5 frames per second, which isn't bad. We can go to 6 frames per second in the 1.2 crop mode, which is a slight crop, or we can get 7 frames per second with this grip in DX mode. And in DX mode, this 36 megapixel sensor gives you a 15.3 megapixel image, which, if you think about it, is about the same. It's just barely 1 megapixel, less than a megapixel different between this and a D4. So that's still not 10 frames a second, but at 7 frames per second in DX mode, this suddenly becomes a viable candidate, in my opinion, for a wildlife enthusiast camera. Because it shoots fast enough, it's got a very large frame buffer, you can just fire off frames as fast as you want. And with that crop mode, it means that you can use now a 300 or a 80 to 400 millimeter zoom lens, shoot it in DX mode, and you've got the equivalent of a 600 millimeter lens. That's really nice, especially considering that a 600 millimeter lens or a 500 millimeter lens, if you get the Nikon one at least, that's going to set you back about $7 or $8 or even more, $1,000. That's a lot of money to be parting with for a lens if you don't use it all the time, and they're a real pain to pack and carry around. So suddenly this became, in my opinion, as I was thinking about it, an attractive option as a backup birding camera. And a camera that I could use on a photo safari or wildlife camera, get fast enough action without having to compromise the degree of frame rate. That I wouldn't have to give up as much frame rate as I would when I use the D800. Plus, again, coupled with that faster autofocus. So those are some of the things that I really liked. Now let me demonstrate a few other things real quick. Let's go in here, and I'm going to take this battery grip right off. And let's just do a couple of side-by-side comparisons between these two cameras. They look basically the same. They each have a pop-up flash. Okay, no real differences there. Again, the grip, the controls are all about the same. Biggest difference on the outside of this camera is that Nikon has gotten rid of the little ring on the back that's on the D800, the ring to change the metering modes. It's been replaced by the meter pattern button on the top. This button used to be the bracketing button on the D800. That button is now relocated. It's right here, this little button. And speaking of bracketing, this is the third real huge thing as far as I'm concerned for using this camera in more day-to-day use. The D800, 4 frames a second, would bracket one stop apart, and in order to get a reasonable bracketing range, plus or minus 2 EV for an HDR image, you had to do 5 frames. You had to do -2, -1, 0, +1, +2. Similarly to the D4 and the D4S, the D800 or D810 now allows you to bracket. If I turn it on, I can bracket 3 frames, 2 stops, or even 3 stops apart. That means to do a bracketing sequence, 3 shots at 5 frames a second, or 5 shots at 4 frames a second. This makes handheld HDR a little bit more of a possibility with a D810. So if that's something that you like to do, grab a quick HDR bracket without using a tripod, which can work in some situations, this camera has an advantage over this camera. Not to mention, you're only capturing 3 frames. It saves you space on your memory card. Okay, both of these cameras have both compact flash and SD memory slots. Other little differences on here, on the back of the camera, Nikon's added a little I button for extra info. You can just hit that. Many of the other refinements have to do with video. There's a new picture control for people who are either capturing video or JPEGs called flat. And this is a very low contrast, very neutral type of image rendition, and that you can use that. And if you convert your images with Nikon software, you can use that as well. Another little thing, minor difference, but it can be useful for certain things, is that the base ISO of this camera is ISO 64 without having to go into low -1. So this means that if you're interested in doing longer exposures, things like moving water and that type of stuff, or star trails, you can really get nice long exposures by lowering the ISO below 100 and still being in the native range. This also has an expanded ISO range. It will go up to, I think, 50,000. I haven't really looked. You can read the specs out there, but if I crank the ISO all the way up, it goes to 12,800, and then I can get 2 stops above that if I go into the high modes, which are out of spec. So higher ISO range, what does that mean for you? It means, on the one hand, you can shoot it in lower light, but more importantly, what it means is that all of the lower ISOs are just that much better, that much cleaner. I've looked at images at 3200 ISO from the 810 against my D4, and while the D4 still has a little bit smoother grain, a little less grain, there's very, very good. I wouldn't call the D810 noisy in any way whatsoever. It's absolutely no problem to use it at that. So we're talking about slightly better economics, slightly better frame rate, lower ISO, true lack of anti-aliasing filter, a little bit lighter. The LCD's got more dots. It's a little sharper. You can also adjust its color balance. You can look at, adjust your color on the screen if you want, just for viewing. The better bracketing. None of these things, by and large, are, any one of those features are a reason to upgrade to this camera from a D800 if you've already got one. Okay, but they are good features. They are features that are useful, features that I at least find useful, and that's why I felt it was useful for me, or valid, to upgrade to this camera. So if you're out there, again, $3,300 is not a cheap camera. This is not an inexpensive piece of kit. You have to decide what you want to do. So what should you do? If you already have a D800, the majority of photographers that have a D800 or D800E, you're going to be just fine with one. Unless you've got those specific needs, like action or wildlife, where you want to use this, becomes a more all-purpose camera, that would be a reason to potentially upgrade. If you're looking to get a new camera and you're trying to decide what you should do, you've got some really nice options for you. If you don't have either one of these cameras, obviously the D810 is the latest and greatest Nikon. You can't go wrong if you've got the money. The other thing you could consider, though, is picking up a D800 or D800E on the used market, and depending on the condition, you can find these for under $3,000, for ranging from $2,400 to $2,700. So you can save a few $100s by purchasing one of these, and you're going to be really happy with this camera. I mean, there's very little differences in terms of actual image quality between the 800 and the 810. So just keep that in mind. It's a great option for you. Check out the used market, and there's good deals on that. Now, before we get into our photo tip for the day, I want to bring up a couple of things if you're using Adobe Photoshop Lightroom to process files from a D810. One, that the camera profiles that came with the latest version of Lightroom, Lightroom 5.6 and ACR 8.6, they apparently had some kind of glitch in them where occasionally you could get posterization, banding in your images, and that's never a good thing. There are beta camera profiles out there on Adobe's site. You can install, you have to install them manually. It's not in an update to Lightroom yet. So if you go and you just go onto Adobe's website, search for D810, you'll find a zip archive you can download for either Mac or Windows. Download the profiles and put them in your camera profiles folder. It tells you in the instructions where to do that. Relaunch Lightroom or Bridge ACR, and you'll be able to use those profiles with your D810 files. I can say I've tried them, they work great. Another thing about the D810, and that was a service advisory from Nikon. I should point this out. If you've got a D810 already, there was a service advisory that went out on earlier serial numbers of this camera. You can go in there. What the service advisory was that in certain extreme cases, for long exposures, so if it was taking exposures in the dark for minutes, there would be unacceptable hotspots or noise in the image beyond what you would normally get from a long exposure noise. And this is correctable if you send the camera into Nikon. So if you go to Nikon's website, click on the service advisory link, and you click on the D810 advisory, you can put in your serial number into the website. And the serial number is on the bottom of the camera right here. You put it in, and it will tell you if your camera is in the range of potentially affected units. If it is, Nikon will print you a prepaid UPS label. You put it in a box, you ship it to Nikon. They'll turn it around and repair it for you for free. And ship it back to you for free. So just keep that in mind. Now, my model, my serial number, I purchased this camera just this week. Got it today, actually. And it's not in the affected range. So I think cameras in the current batch are not affected anymore. This has been resolved by Nikon. So if you're buying your D810 after any time at this point, you're probably fine. You don't have to worry about anything. It's just something to keep in mind and get fixed. So let's talk about our tip for the day, and for that I'm going to go over to my computer. We're going to talk a little bit about Lightroom and how you can use the Alt key to do some pretty cool visualizations of clipping and other things in the Develop module. So I want to show you that, and let's take a look at that. Alright, I've opened up Lightroom here, and in the Develop module I want to show you some really cool things that happen with what I call your best friend in Lightroom, and that's the Alt or Option key. If you're on a PC keyboard, it's going to be the Alt key. If you're on a Mac keyboard, it's going to be the Option key. It's the same thing. And if you hold down the Option or Alt key while dragging various sliders, you get some really nice previews depending on which module that you're in and which panel that you're in. So let me start with the basic panel. And what I can show you is that by holding down the Alt key and changing the tone sliders, highlights, you see I switch to a clipping view, and I can see where clipped highlights occur. Same thing with shadows. I can see the color tones of clipped shadows. Whites, same deal. So this allows me to really fine-tune my images, and blacks. So I want to really get to the point where I'm just starting to clip. I can do that, again, by holding down the Alt or Option key while dragging the slider. Another place where you can see the Alt key working is in the Detail panel. And on the sharpening tools, you can get a luminance preview when you drag the Amount slider. So let's zoom in to 100% here and click the Alt key, and as I crank up the sharpness, I can see the grain and or the halos appear. When I use the Alt key on the radius slider, I can see the primary sharpening halos appear. So I can use this as a threshold view to adjust the size of the sharpening halo to get it just where I want it, as well as the strength of the detail slider. So if I crank up the detail slider, you can see here where its intensity and how it's applied. And then lastly, if you use the masking slider, and I'll zoom back out on this one, Alt key, hold down the masking slider, and you can get the preview of the threshold mask that is created when you use the masking slider. So those black areas are going to be protected from sharpening. Similarly, you get this luminance view with the noise reduction slider when you hold down the Alt key. Another place where you're going to see it is under Effects. You can use it with post-crop vignetting to help you visualize the placement of the vignette. If I hold it down with the amount, nothing really happens because we can see what's going on. But if I hold down the Alt key when setting the midpoint, you see I get a strong view so I can place the midpoint where I want it. Let go of the Alt key. And then if I hold it down with the roundness, I can use it to visualize the shape of the vignette. And the feathering, I can also use it to visualize that effect. And you can see it with the highlights as well. So the Alt key is your friend when you're using the Develop module in Lightroom. You hold it down, drag a slider. It's very useful. When you hold down the Alt key as well, it changes a few other things that it does. Within panels, you can see you can reset. It changes the panel to a reset. So these subviews, if I click Alt, I can reset tone, reset presence. So I get a reset button. And if I hold down the Alt key, my reset button here in the lower right corner changes to set default, which allows me to change the camera default settings for a particular camera model. So your Alt key is a really powerful tool in Lightroom in the Develop module. Check it out. And don't forget, this is all covered in my ebook, Moving to Lightroom. Okay, well, I hope you enjoyed today's episode of the Sensor Plane Photography Podcast. Again, don't forget to check out the website at www.luminescentphoto.com. I've got some workshops coming up in the month of September, October, and November, so check out that workshops tab so you can hopefully come along with me on one of my upcoming trips, and we're going to have a lot of fun shooting out in some really interesting locations. So check it out, and don't forget to check out my latest ebook, Moving to Lightroom, available directly as an interactive PDF download from my website, www.luminescentphoto.com. Thanks again, and I'll see you next time.